no fringe crank. That was James Madison, the father of the Constitution. And he was far from alone. Over and over and over again, the leading minds of the founding warned us what that debt would lead to: corruption, tyranny, war, and collapse. And today, that national curse is bigger than ever, and it keeps getting worse. On this episode, you'll hear how the founders warned us about national debt. And these are warnings we can't afford to ignore any longer. But first of all, before getting to that, welcome, and thank you for joining me here on the Path to Liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Friday, June 6th, 2025. So, I guess we start off with this. How bad is it really? Well, the anti-federalist writer Brutus, in January of 1788, said he could hardly imagine anything worse than this. He said, "I can scarcely contemplate a greater calamity that could befall this country than to be loaded with a debt exceeding their ability ever to discharge." And at the height of the American Revolution, years before the shot heard around the world and the war for independence, James Otis Jr. called out the debt for what it was. It was crushing the colonies for the crimes of the empire. He said, "The national debt is a terrible evil." And even after independence, the evil didn't go away, the danger didn't end, not even close. And that's why in his 5th annual message to Congress, this is December of 1793, President George Washington didn't talk about debt as some mere policy debate, not some discussion about legislation. He treated it like a threat so serious that delay in paying it off was seen as dangerous. He said no pecuniary consideration is more urgent than the regular redemption and discharge of the public debt. On none can delay be more injurious or an economy of time more valuable. The founders, the old revolutionaries, almost all of them, but not all of them, they understood that debt is a massive threat to liberty. And that's how Tench Coxe put it in his Essay of an American Citizen, number 4. He said, "The liberties of a people involved in debt are as uncertain as the liberty of an individual in the same situation." And he explained why, of course. Their virtue is more precarious. The unfortunate citizen must yield to the operation of the laws, while a bankrupt nation too easily annihilates the sacred obligations of gratitude and honor and becomes execrable and infamous. And Tench Coxe did not mess around. Most people have never read anything he's ever written, but he was one of the most important people during the ratification debates, one of the most widely read. And so we decided to publish a book. I thought I'd quick mention this. We published a book on him. It's our most recent publication, The Other Federalist Papers, Tench Coxe. If you want to pick up a copy, that's over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/Tench book. It's all spelled out. It's got a bunch of original writing going through what he had to say, plus all his source documents that we covered in the various appendices. Again, 10th Amendment Center, 10thamendmentcenter.com/Tench book. Enough with the ad on that, because debt wasn't seen as just a bad policy. They understood that it had been used as a weapon to attack and destroy liberty for ages, for centuries, for thousands of years, all through history, really. And Thomas Gordon, in his Works of Sallust, he pointed to Rome, to Caesar, who bought power and control and the destruction of liberty through debt. He said Caesar, besides wasting all his own substance, ran in debt near to millions of our money by bribing the people and their tribunes, took on debt to hand out stuff to get people on his side. He said Caesar did by bribes what his sword, without them, never could have done. Oppressed the liberty of his country. History doesn't always repeat, but of course, it certainly rhymes. And where the thing gets really dangerous, the real trap with all this, is when the people themselves start to believe the propaganda. They believe it's all legitimate. But John Taylor of Caroline, he wasn't fooled at all. He put it like this: a spell is put upon our understandings by the words public faith and national credit, which fascinates us into an opinion that fraud, corruption, and oppression constitute national credit, and debt and slavery public faith. But John Taylor didn't stop there. He understood that eventually it expands and grows into basically a system-wide capture. Corruption, fake offices, insider, lending, self-dealing, all the nasty, corrupt things that happen in a giant empire. He wrote, "A legislature in a nation where the system of paper and patronage prevails will be governed by that interest and legislate in its favor." I mean, this should be obvious, but for some reason most people don't think about it. He said, "Such a legislature will create unnecessary offices that themselves or their relations may be endowed with them. They will lavish the revenue to enrich themselves. They will borrow for the nation that they may lend. They will offer lenders great profits that they may share in them." And Benjamin Rush, by 1790, he was pretty upset about what was going on. And he wrote this in a letter to James Madison. He pointed us to the consequences of all of this. Aristocracy, in essence, replaces a republic. Fraud is rewarded over honest labor. It's a total inversion of values and morals. He said, "It is amusing to hear gentlemen talk of the public blessing of a debt contracted to foreigners and a few American speculators of $4 or $5 millions a year." Now, you might hear off and on through this episode a public debt or a national debt being referred to as a public blessing. This was a widely understood phrase because this came right from the pen of Alexander Hamilton under the Articles of Confederation. And he was a big fan of having a public debt. We'll talk about him a little bit more in just a moment. So people were kind of railing on this mentality. Benjamin Rush was another one. He said, "Nothing fundamentally unjust can ever produce happiness in its issue. It will lay the foundation of an aristocracy in our country. It will change the property of 9/10 of the freeholders of the states. And it will be a lasting monument of the efficacy of idleness, speculation, and fraud above industry, economy, and integrity in obtaining wealth and independence." And Benjamin Rush did not mess around at all. But eventually, sometimes the people finally wake up to the big scam. But unfortunately, at that point, the politicians, well, they don't just give up their power like, "All right, you caught us, so let's stop the spending, let's cut down the debt, and let's get things back on an even keel." Well, as John Taylor of Caroline pointed out, they tend to just double down. He said, "As grievances gradually excite national discontent, they will fix the yoke more securely by making it gradually heavier. And they will finally avow and maintain their corruption by establishing an irresistible standing army, not to defend the nation, but to defend a system or plundering the nation." Once this corrupt system is in place, it needs fuel, and that fuel ends up being you. Mercy Otis Warren, well, she warned us. The result is always the same. More national debt means more taxes, more suffering, and a total death of freedom. Here's how she put it: "The artificial creation of expenses by those who deem a public debt a public blessing will easily suggest plausible pretenses for taxation, until every class is burdened to the utmost stretch of forbearance, and the great body of people reduced to penury and slavery." And there really is no limit to how far these people will push it. People with power, people who can expand their power, they will take on as much debt and use it for as much control as they can get away with. And de Tracy, I believe is how you say his name in French properly, he saw exactly what happens when governments gain access to massive funds through a system of debt and credit. Any limits on their power, they're toast. He said, now history teaches us, and this is Thomas Jefferson's translation, I think in 1816, now history teaches us that it is in fact, since governments have had what is called credit, that is to say the possibility of employing in an instant the funds of several years, that they have no longer set bounds either to their prodigality or their ambition or their projects. Now, I realize I am blasting through a lot of really important stuff really quickly here, but I'm hoping that this episode serves as a bit of a highlight reel for you. It encourages you.
That's part one. Hang in there, part two, coming up next.
A tool and a weapon to destroy liberty. Thomas Jefferson certainly understood the dangers of a national debt pretty well. He saw debt as the most corruptive force, worse than any external threat. He wrote, "There does not exist an engine so corruptive of the government and so demoralizing of the nation as a public debt." And man, Jefferson did not hold back. He certainly was a student of history. He certainly would have read things like the works of Sallust from Thomas Gordon, and he knew how things went down all the way back to Rome, because he continued with this: "It will bring on us more ruin at home than all the enemies from abroad against whom this army and navy are to protect us." And that's why when he was Secretary of State, he sent a letter to President Washington where he explained the battle lines. And I think the battle lines are the same today. There are those of us who want to see the debt gone, and then there are those who want to use the debt as a tool to manipulate and control. And Jefferson put it like this: "This exactly marks the difference between Colonel Hamilton's views and mine. That I wish the debt paid tomorrow. He wishes it never to be paid, but always to be a thing wherewith to corrupt and manage the legislature." And James Madison understood this as well, and he named debt as one of a trifecta, one of the three known tools of dominating the people. He said armies and debts and taxes are the known instruments for bringing the many under the domination of the few. Now, of course, they don't just rob people. They don't just rip us off. They don't just destroy liberty with a national debt. John Taylor of Caroline explained that it's also a national security threat. He said, hence, it is obvious that debt, so far from being either strength or credit, is a diminution of both. It reduces both. And that freedom from debt is the only genuine source of national strength depending on revenue. But it gets worse, and it keeps getting worse. There's always more and more and more, because once government gets access to this system of debt and credit, it doesn't just get bloated and massive, it gets militant. And that's how de Tracy put it: "The end answered by credit is the maintenance of distant wars. That is to say, their prolongation." In other words, if they're already waging war, it's almost going to guarantee that they continue them, make them longer and longer and longer. And Thomas Jefferson agreed. He saw paying down debt, paying it off, as a moral obligation, one that would save us from generations of bloodshed. He said, "It is incumbent on every generation to pay its own debts as it goes," a principle which, if acted on, would save 1/2 of the wars of the world. George Washington, in his farewell address in September of 1796, he called public credit a source of strength, but only if you use it like a precision tool, carefully and rarely. He said, as a very important source of strength and security, cherish public credit. One method of preserving it is to use it as sparingly as possible. President Washington took it even further, doubling down on the idea of keeping the debt paid down in order to have strong national security. But then on top of it, he implored us morally to not pass the debt off to future generations. If we took on the debt, we should pay it off. He said we should avoid occasions of expense by cultivating peace, but remembering also that timely disbursements to prepare for danger frequently prevent much greater disbursements to repel it. Avoiding, likewise, he wrote, the accumulation of debt, not only by shunning occasions of expense, but by vigorous exertion in time of peace to discharge the debts which unavoidable wars may have occasioned. Not social programs, unavoidable wars. Not ungenerously throwing upon posterity the burden which we ourselves ought to bear. And St. George Tucker, in his view of the Constitution of the United States, exposed another and possibly deeper danger: how national debt is used to enrich the powerful few and strengthen government power at the same time. And then, of course, it leaves the burden to future generations. He said, on the other hand, where loans are voluntarily incurred upon the principle that public debt is a public blessing, or to serve the purposes of aggrandizing a few at the expense of the nation in general, or of strengthening the hands of government, or more properly those of a party grasping at power, influence, and wealth, nothing, he wrote, can be more dangerous to the liberty of the citizen, not more injurious to remotest posterity, as well as present generations, posterity as well. So dangerous to the future as well. And that is a moral imperative. And back to Thomas Jefferson, he didn't call it economics. He didn't call it a policy debate. He called it for what it truly is. He said the principle of spending money to be paid by posterity under the name of funding is but swindling futurity on a large scale. And this is definitely not the kind of thing we learn about in the government-run and government-approved education system. And this is a big part of the reason why we work so hard every single day. Our 19-year anniversary is coming up at the end of this month, June of 2025. I can hardly believe that we're here for so many years, but we're still just scratching the surface. We've been working day in and day out, month in and month out, year in and year out to reach and teach more and more people about these forgotten, ignored, essential principles from the founders, from the old revolutionaries, and from the people that they read and learned from. And nothing helps us do this work more than the financial faith and support of our members. If you want to give us a happy birthday gift in advance, I'd be very grateful for your support.
Well, that concludes an episode of the upcoming Zombie Files. And this is exactly what the founders of this United States and our freedom warned us about. Zombie Force out.
There's something awfully screwy going on around here.